let's talk about this. This is also interesting. So on one hand, you got people upset about this rest thing and how unfair it is that the 49ers are playing all these teams coming off of a bye. And then on the other hand, the odds makers have the 49ers as favorites in every single game this year. I believe this happened last year with the 49ers as well. And that was the first time in NFL history that had happened. Now, in back to back years, they're doing it again. What do you think about this? The 49ers being favorited in every game at this point during the preseason as they look at the schedule. If you were to bet on any game, the 49ers are going to be favorites.
I think it's weird because one, I don't get how the Niners are continue to be favored over the Kansas City Chiefs, man. Like since Mahomes has been there, I don't think we've beaten the Mahomes-led Kansas City Chiefs. One, two, when you go on the road for divisional rivals, you hardly see teams be favored. You're also playing a good Lions team. You're on the road in Green Bay and Buffalo. Like those are games where it's like favored. Like those are potentially games that you should not be favored because they're a playoff team with a great quarterback and you're on the road. So that's where I'm kind of confused in terms of why we're favored in every game. I understand that they have a great roster, but I don't think they're favorites in every game. I think it's more so the odds bettors understanding that, hey, you know what? They're a really good team. If we make them the favorites in every game, people are going to either bet on them or they're going to bet on the opposing team. Vegas is kind of trying to make sure they save money in a way. Like, come on, if we see the Niners are not favored against Minnesota, right? Like, you're going to mini. You know how many Niner fans would place a bet right now with hefty money on the Niners to beat Minnesota? So, like,
Oh yeah.
I think it's odd makers understanding, like, hey, you know what? The Niners are really damn good. Let's not mess around and make them favorites. And like, I don't know how to say his name. I'm going to just go Terry Dome. He says you get 3 points for being at home. So every game the Niners should be at home. They should be favored. So that's automatically 9 games since they're hosting games. I just think it's weird that they're favored in every game.
Yeah, Terradome, I actually thought the same thing, and this used to be the case, but I was talking with I forget who it was online. This was like a year and a half ago because I'd made a statement very similar, and they said that's actually no longer true. And this is somebody who's an avid gambler. They said it's anywhere from 1.5 points to 3.5 points, depending on the team and home field advantage. So it actually does vary across teams, and I don't know what goes into that formula, how that works. Maybe the 49ers fall into that 3-point favorite zone, but that's not necessarily the case. Teams could be as little as get as little as 1.5 points for being a home team, which is interesting to me because I always heard it was just 3 points. That was the rule, but not necessarily the case anymore. But yeah, man, I think I agree with this. I mean, it really comes down to a whole betting situation where it's just easier to bet on the 49ers. The Chiefs one's interesting because the Chiefs are, I mean, we talk about complaining about the schedule. When I initially looked at the schedule, I was like, oh, the 49ers have a Thursday night game prior to this. They're going to have all the rest. This is a game that they're going to want to win. This should be, if you're going to beat the Chiefs, this is it. And then I found out later the Chiefs were coming off a bye. I was like, all right, well, maybe so much for the whole rest thing. You would think that the team that is the defending champs that does beat the 49ers every time they play them would be the favorites. Although I'm not necessarily picking the Chiefs to win that game. It's just hard for me to understand how that's possible. And I look at other games as well. I know the Buffalo Bills on paper aren't as good as the 49ers. I would agree with that in a vacuum. Neutral field or in San Francisco or Santa Clara, I would definitely pick the 49ers. But it's a road game in December, team coming off of a bye after being in Green Bay the week before. I feel like the Bills should probably be favored in that game as well. Not that they're guaranteed to win, but if I'm just looking at it from a betting standpoint, I think I would lay my money on the Bills, especially if they're getting a really interesting as well.
Yeah, especially because you're playing the Bills and Packers during the cold season. Like if you're getting a snow game, I think it heavily favors the Packers and the Bills because they have the quarterback with a stronger arm, and when you do get into those kind of those games, it comes down to who can run the ball and who has a stronger arm as a quarterback, who could knife through the wind and in that cold environment. And that leads to Josh Allen and Jordan Love being favored for me. But I mean, I think the Niners schedule is pretty solid, man. Like, you should start off the season hot. You're playing Minnesota, New England, Arizona. Like, those are pretty winnable games. New York is a very winnable game. You don't really know what they're going to be. So essentially, they're looking at it. You should start off pretty hot. It's later in the year when you're having to go to your place at home versus Seattle, and then you're on the road for 2 weeks for Green Bay, Buffalo. Then you have I guess what you would call, a easier game with Chicago, and then you end out with the 3 straight. I think from week 10 on, it's a pretty tough schedule. Like essentially, but it's like everyone's schedule is going to get tough. I saw, who was it? There was 2 teams who don't they play, might be Baltimore. Someone in the AFC, like in that division, they play 6 of their last 8 games are divisional opponents, and like that's rough, man. That's very rough. So like, we want to complain about not playing or playing so many with less rest. I would not want to play our divisional opponents that many times in a short period, because that means you're back to back playing each other.
Ugh. It has everything to do with it. Let me put it to you like this, 49ers all day. When the Miami Dolphins were going to play the Kansas City Chiefs and it was frigid weather, what was the lead up to that whole game? It was talking about Tua and his arm and can it cut through the weather, right? That was the whole conversation leading up to that game. That's why a lot of people were in on Kansas City. I mean, obviously for other reasons, but people were like, listen, Tua's arm doesn't travel in the cold weather. And if it's supposed to snow on top of that, we don't believe he can get it done. Then the very next week, you had Josh Allen versus Patrick Mahomes. Guess how many people talked about the weather, which was actually supposed to be worse? 0. You know why? Because nobody's concerned about their arm cutting through any inclement weather. So those things definitely matter. You start to get interesting weather, cold weather, the ball gets, extra inflated. It's harder to throw. You get some moisture in the air. We've seen that with Brock Purdy. Moisture certainly has affected him thus far in his career. Yeah, I mean, a strong arm being able to carry. Joe Montana was a good example of this. They lost, I think it was the AFC Championship, and he talked about how his arm wasn't strong enough to cut through the wind that day. He just couldn't do it. So, arm strength matters when you've got crazy weather. And if it's going to be extremely cold and there's moisture in the air, give me a strong arm in that particular environment every day of the week. So